Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Amalia Corby. I'm a Federal Affairs Specialist with the American Society for Microbiology. To introduce our topic and our panelists today, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Duane Bucco, the chair of ASM's Subcommittee on Microbiological Issues Impacting Minorities, Professor of Biomedical Sciences, and Director of Graduate Biomedical Sciences Program at Quinnipiac University. Take it away, Duane.
Thanks, Amalia, and thanks to all of you for joining us today, and a special thanks to our panelists who are sharing their knowledge with us on this important subject. While health disparities in the United States are not new, we have certainly seen these challenges in stark terms in 2020 as our nation and countries around the world have been confronted with COVID-19. We know that while the coronavirus is a threat to everyone, the burden has not been equally felt. There are disproportionately higher rates of illness and death in communities of color in the United States. The reason for this and other health disparities are myriad, but they illustrate with new urgency the need to foster a diverse and inclusive scientific workforce to tackle these and other challenges from a wide range of perspectives. The need is especially felt in areas of leadership, where decisions are made as to what research and funding priorities are, and in having visible mentors for those coming through the pipeline. Efforts to increase diversity in the scientific workforce have produced incremental progress. ASM has undertaken its own efforts to build a home where people of different perspectives and identities contribute to the production of new scientific knowledge and talent, a home where these people have opportunities to share their research findings, engage in scientific discourse, and demonstrate their scientific expertise. We're also appreciative of the Congressional STEM Education Caucus efforts to support science programming and mentorship at the primary and secondary levels. The House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, under the leadership of Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson, has demonstrated a commitment to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the scientific workforce through transformative legislation and through a request for a National Academy study on systemic racism in STEM. Although she could not be here today, Chairwoman Bernice Johnson sent us her remarks, which I would like to read from now. I regret that I am unable to join you in this event, but I want to commend you all for helping to advance this difficult but important discussion. In particular, I want to thank the moderators and speakers. Your voice is critical for raising awareness of the harms caused by systemic racism in the sciences. I know that the burden of speaking out too often falls on leaders like you, and that toll that those efforts takes on you often goes unacknowledged. Thank you for the work you are doing. It is vitally important. Unfortunately, this administration has taken an ill-informed and aggressive approach to rolling back the modest progress that has been achieved to date in making the sciences more inclusive. Diversity and inclusion training in federal workspaces at universities and in all companies that hold federal contracts is being undermined. Universities that are seeking to have honest conversations about racism on their own campuses are being targeted. I want to assure you that the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology is actively engaging with the science agencies and universities to monitor these concerning situations and is prepared to take more public action as needed. While I am deeply frustrated that rather than focusing on solutions, we are still debating the reality of systemic racism, I remain committed to doing the hard work that must be done to move our country forward. Developing a diverse and inclusive science, technology, engineering, and mathematics workforce is a top priority for my committee. Through hearings, oversight, and legislation, we have been working to address the inequities we observe across all disciplines and at all levels of STEM studies and careers. Over the past 2 years, our committee has advanced several bills to address the myriad inequities in the STEM workforce. We enacted a bill to bestow Congress's highest civilian honor, the Congressional Gold Medal, on the hundreds of women mathematicians and engineers who withstood the daily indignity of racial segregation and gender discrimination to help us win the space race. We passed a bill to rename the National Science Foundation's flagship telescope, currently under construction, after a pioneer and advocate for women in STEM, Dr. Vera Rubin. This marked the first time a national observatory was named after a woman. We passed 3 bills out of the House that are aimed at identifying and lowering barriers and grooming new opportunities for underrepresented groups in STEM studies and careers. HR 2528, the STEM Opportunities Act, HR 36, Combating Sexual Harassment in Science Act, and HR 4372, the MSI STEM Achievement Act. I have urged the Senate to bring these important bills up for a vote before the end of the year, increasing the diversity of the STEM workforce is critical to ensuring our research enterprise is tackling the most important set of problems and benefiting all Americans, as well as drawing on all of our brainpower to remain economically competitive. Equally important to advancing racial justice in the sciences is advancing racial justice through science. In many of the policy debates Congress and other policymakers engage in, the health and well-being of communities of color hangs in the balance. I feel strongly that my committee has an important role to play to ensure those debates are informed by the best available evidence. To that end, we have developed a number of bills to address societal challenges that disproportionately harm racial and ethnic minority Americans, including H.R. 435, the National Gun Violence Research Act, H.R. 7252, Promoting Fair and Effective Policing Through Research Act, and H.R. 8239, the Forensic Science Research and Standards Act. However, these challenges cannot be solved from the top down. We must cultivate a sense of responsibility and commitment to change throughout the scientific community if we are to root out the policies and cultural norms that perpetuate inequities and injustice. I am heartened to see the groundswell of support from the research community, including associations like the American Society for Microbiology, for creating real and lasting change. I look forward to continuing to work alongside you to ensure these aspirations are realized. Sincerely, Eddie Bernice Johnson, Chairwoman, Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. I want to thank Chairwoman Bernice Johnson for her remarks. As she states, we must do more. ASM is committed to being part of the solution and positive change. Today's speakers will discuss strategies to strengthen the pipeline of students from underrepresented populations, including the importance of mentorship, ways to address the systemic issues that face Black scientists and other underrepresented groups in STEM, and methods to engage future scientists of diverse backgrounds in the microbial sciences. We have an esteemed panel to share their perspectives with you today. First up is Dr. Kashana Taylor, a virologist and advocate for underrepresented groups in STEM. Dr. Taylor, is currently a postdoctoral fellow at Carnegie Mellon University in the lab of Dr. Elizabeth Wayne. Her current NSF-funded research focuses on the role of monocytes and macrophages in SARS-CoV-2 infection and subsequent development of COVID-19. Dr. Taylor received her bachelor's degree in animal science from the University of Delaware, where she was named a Woman of Promise in addition to being an EPSCoR and Summer Institute research scholar. She earned her master's degree in public health microbiology and emerging infectious diseases at the George Washington University, where her work, which was supported by the Smithsonian Institute, focused on the effects of concentrated poultry operation on the presence of antibiotic-resistant E. coli in the Chesapeake Bay watersheds. Dr. Taylor went on to earn her PhD from the University of Georgia in interdisciplinary biomedical sciences in 2018. She also serves as a counselor for virology trainees with the American Society for Virology and has served in several other leadership positions during her time in higher education, including most recently as the co-leader of Black and Microbiology. Following Dr. Taylor is Dr. Alfredo Torres, the Herman Barnett Distinguished Professor in Microbiology and Immunology, Associate Dean of Faculty Affairs and Professional Development, and Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Texas Medical Branch. He is a highly regarded bacteriologist, vaccinologist with extensive experience in the study of bacterial pathogens and biodefense-related organisms. He has published more than 130 peer-reviewed publications, 15 book chapters, and 2 books on topics related to microbial pathogenesis, food safety, therapeutics, and vaccine development. Dr. Torres is a leader in teaching and mentoring diverse trainees in the local and national and international level, as well as the support and development of faculty at UTMB and in Latin America. Dr. Annette Angus is a microbiologist by training and a social activist at heart. As a scientist at the Clorox Company in the microbiology group of the Advanced Measurement Sciences Department in Pleasanton, California, Dr. Angus manages several complex business projects as the technical expert and microbiological voice, providing guidance on novel and existing product formulations. Dr. Angus has made her mark not only as a respected microbiologist in the CPG industry, but also as a mentor to and advocate for young women and underrepresented minorities pursuing higher education and scientific careers. She is a proud first-generation American of Caribbean descent and the first in her family to earn college degrees. She is passionate about social justice, education reform, good food, and travel to new places. Dr. Angus earned her Bachelor of Science in Microbiology from Cal State University Northridge and her PhD in Microbiology from the University of California at Berkeley. Our Q&A moderator will be Dr. Floyd Wormley. Dr. Wormley is a professor and associate provost for research and dean of graduate studies at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas. Dr. Wormley received his Bachelor of Science degree in Cellular and Molecular Biology from Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana, and his MS and PhD degree in Microbiology, Immunology, and Parasitology from Louisiana State University Health Sciences Center, also in New Orleans. He then conducted his postdoctoral studies in infectious diseases at Duke University Medical Center in Durham, North Carolina. Dr. Wormley is a 2019 Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, a 2017 Fulbright Scholar, and a 2016 Fellow of the American Academy of Microbiology. The purpose of Dr. Wormley's research program is to develop novel immune therapies and/or vaccines to treat or prevent invasive fungal pathogens, and is currently supported by the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases of the National Institutes of Health. Once our speakers have concluded their remarks, we will have a discussion and we welcome your questions. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Kashana Taylor.
Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak in front of you all today. I am going to begin by giving a brief overview of some of the effects of having poor or no DEI on scientific output. And so historically, I think people tend to focus on some of the things that I have on the slide here. So loss of creative input. So labs that are more diverse tend to have more creative experiments, tend to have more creative data output, those sorts of things. But in light of the given pandemic, I also wanted to highlight that without the input of marginalized groups on hypotheses and research that we have, you risk the chance of perpetuating racism in your hypotheses, your results, as well as your technical and medical advances. And so in this pandemic, we've already seen some evidence of this in terms of some scientific output that has focused on trying to find a biological reason for the differences in COVID cases among Black people and other minority groups as in comparison to the white population. And so the problem with this is that biologically, we are not very different from each other in those ways. And so the way that the virus is affecting us is more of a sociological issue than it is a biological issue. And so by ignoring the social determinants of health, which is what most people call it, so basically the social factors of systemic racism that then have an effect on where you get healthcare, how you get healthcare, how much you pay for it, those sorts of things, they go ignored, and we don't then find answers to fixing those issues. And instead we focus on these hypotheses that have no biological basis, and it's essentially a waste of money, right? And so in addition to loss of creative output, I think we're misplacing the funds that we do have to do research. And then along those lines, you then perpetuate continued community distrust in research and in the medical complex. And so when we do come up with solutions for these things, we then are not able to disseminate them in the best way possible because there are communities who don't want to be involved in this type of research. And then the final thing, and what I will focus on probably for the most of this talk as the most junior person on the panel, is that you have a continued attrition of minoritized scientists. And so this is another way that we lose research funds, because we input money for graduate stipends and research, and then a lot of the times the research doesn't get published because the students leave the system or they're pushed out. And so you then don't have the numbers that you would expect to see in terms of the faculty at a university or even at like a public institution like the NIH or the FDA. And so I want to focus specifically on some of the barriers that minoritized trainees tend to face, right? And so these can be broken up into several categories, and this is not all inclusive. There are definitely other barriers here that I did not mention. But as far as implicit bias goes, minority scientists have to deal with implicit bias in admission to their graduate schools or to their postdoc programs, in hiring also, and then in their evaluation, right? So there's always the question of whether or not we're being evaluated in the same way that our white peers and colleagues are being evaluated. Another common barrier is mentorship conflicts. And so as far as trainees go, so we are considered trainees as undergraduates, as PhD students, and then as postdocs until we transition into a permanent position. And so along these ways, we're expected to have mentors who can help us to grow both in our research as well as our career development. And so these things can be stifled when you have laboratory culture conflicts. So when the environment is not inclusive of these different cultures that we may possess, we may lack adequate mentorship. And so there's not much research on this, and I'll talk about why there should be more of that a little bit later. But anecdotally, it seems that minority scientists tend to have less mentorship or less support or less sponsorship than their non-minority peers. And so this then affects us and cascades throughout our careers because we don't have the same support or the same training. And then this also comes in academic output. If you don't have people behind you pushing you to publish, to disseminate your research results, then you then lack those outputs. And so in addition to that, we have institutional policies that may inhibit us from maybe reporting those mentor conflicts, or that do not support us when we do report these conflicts. And then there's the issue of financial support, so both to survive while we are doing the research, and then also for the research in and of itself, as well as representation. And so as a trainee, when I look to my superiors, those who have made it maybe in the tenure track faculty, if I don't see anyone who looks like me, that subliminally that's telling me that either I don't belong or there's something impeding people who look like me from getting to that point. And so that kind of sits in the back of your mind and makes you question where you are in terms of what you're doing and what your career is. And so as these barriers begin to stack on top of each other, it becomes a problem because it's more things to defeat, and you also then this very heavy feeling of having to go through all of these barriers, and you can have long-lasting effects. And so as someone who has experienced many of these barriers, I know that even almost 3 years out of graduation, I'm still starting to come to grips with some of the things that I experienced as a trainee. And so when we talk about funding and how to improve, or when we talk about how to improve these things, I think tying improved outcomes to funding is a really good way to do this, especially on the university level. And so there are some existing programs that aim to increase the diversity of the scientific workforce. And so some of those include the Mosaic program, so maximizing opportunity for scientific academic input. There's the first grant that was supposed to be coming out, which I think has potentially been stalled by the executive order on DEI trainings. And then there's the supplements to promote diversity, which usually tacks on money to an existing R01 or R23, where you can then hire minority scientists. And then there's undergraduate research experiences. And so as they exist now, these are good ways to increase diversity, but they can be improved in many ways to help kind of keep track of the people who are going through these programs. And so my suggestion is evaluation and training of mentors. And so Mosaic probably does the best job of this so far, but I think it would be really good to include evaluation and training of mentors in the diversity supplements. So people are not collecting diversity or collecting minority scientists and then not training them properly. And so there are some other ways, designating awards for specific populations that you're hoping to increase, similar programs for other government agencies, so doing something like Mosaic with NSF and DOD, et cetera, and then funding more education on science outreach outcomes. And so what are some of the reasons why people are leaving the field and kind of digging into that? And so I just wanted to end on Black in microbiology, so which we talked about a little bit. And so when we first started microbiology, our goals were to connect and celebrate Black microbiologists and showcase our talent and bring conversations about the pandemic to the community. And as we moved on, we learned that there was kind of a gap in these organizations who are interested in creating better diversity in their organizations and then their connection to the community. And so we've realized that we can become that resource and kind of bridge the gap between these folks and provide more career development and opportunities for jobs and connection. And so with that, I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Torres.
Thank you, Kishana. Thank you very much. Exactly. Let's see if I can. Yes. Okay. First, thank you for the invitation, for speaking to you and to ASM and the moderators for having me here. What I want to tell you today is a slice of the pie about how we see the training and how this training is affecting potentially the faculty diversity that we see in different schools. So one piece I want to share with you is an activity known as the Annual Biomedical Research Conference for Minority Students, or ABRACAMS, that the American Society for Microbiology sponsors and helps to organize. And I have been fortunate to be a member of the steering committee and now the advisory committee for the past 11 years. And every year we recruit the largest number of minority students to go and present either posters or oral presentations. So this is the good part of the story, is that the numbers of students every year, as you can see here, undergraduate students every year, they keep growing. We started, this is a piece of the information from 2016 to 2018. We went from 2,148 undergraduates and postdocs to almost 3,000 students presenting posters in all different disciplines. We have disciplines from social sciences, physiology, neuroscience, microbiology, immunology, etc., engineering, physics, computer science, etc. And now we have been seeing that there is a larger number of graduate students and postdocs actually participating in this conference and then making networks and connections. This particular conference also recruits a lot of underrepresented minority faculty that can serve as mentors of these students, and also recruits a large number of schools that heavily recruit these students to either becoming medical students in medical schools, or recruits these students to become PhD students in the different graduate schools across the country. I am happy to say that from these 3,000 students, 3,400 students from last year, I think half of them, they received offers to actually join a university, either as a graduate student or as a medical student. That's the good part of the story. The programs that Congress and other associations are putting in place are increasing the numbers of minorities. However, where I see the problem, and I'm going to show you next couple of things that I think there are areas of opportunity that Congress as well as different societies need to start paying attention, is the following. I work in a medical school, and this medical school is known because we're number one in the nation of training Hispanic medical students and number 7 in the nation of training Black medical students. We're so proud of that. We train this group of fantastic students, and then we send them out for residency and eventually advanced training. But once they start looking for faculty positions, this is the data that I got from the Association for American Medical Colleges. And I didn't make a mistake. It's hard to see, but basically on your left, you see female faculty by race and ethnicity. On the right, you see male faculty by race and ethnicity. The only significant line that you see, the yellow one on top, is white faculty in both females and males. And then the orange line that you see underneath, that is about 20%, are Asian faculty. All the other ones at the bottom, that is less than 5%, represent all the other ethnicities in all our medical schools. I'm talking about more than 300 medical schools across the nation that does not have underrepresented minority faculty, at least at levels that we see with our students. Well, Kishan already mentioned the problem that we see. We do not have mentors for these students. They go to medical school and they don't see a physician, they don't see a PhD mentor that can train them because they do not exist. And nothing has been able to change this trend. There's slowly a decrease in the number of white faculty, but there is an increase in Asian faculty, but no minorities. So this is a huge area of opportunity. But let's say that you are lucky, you are bright enough to make it to be a faculty member in a medical school or any other university. What happened to you if you're a male or female minority, and then you start comparing yourself with other faculty? Well, this is something I have been putting together as a Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs, just to demonstrate that if you are a male minority faculty, compared with other males, it takes you longer to become, people that are not familiar with this graph, this is basically representing years since you become a faculty member. And then you see that you can get promoted, you can get tenure in those schools that still tenure is part of the package as a faculty member. And then eventually you become a leader and you start taking administrative positions. If you're a minority male, it takes you longer to become promoted, it takes you longer to become tenure, and it's even more complicated to get to leadership positions compared with other male faculty. If you're a female faculty, compared with males, it takes you longer to become promoted and tenure. And what I have seen, and several other institutions have seen, that females eventually get tired of all the effort they put to try to get to tenure and promotion, that eventually they do not advance to become leaders in their field. They have other important things in their life to do, like family and other important issues. And it's even worse for minority females. Minority females are the ones that take longer to actually become tenure, promoted, and very few of them make leadership positions. If you take this graph and then you plot it to try to see salaries, the same graph comes evident. What you see is female faculty makes from 5 to 50% less salary than males. And if you're a minority female faculty, something between 10, sometimes to 60% less salary than male faculty. Well, if this is not a problem for you, it's significantly a problem for me and for several people like me that are working to try to close the gap between females and male faculty and also minority faculty in our institutions. And that's all I want to say. Hopefully, I put a seed on you to see the discrepancies that you see to advance in academia. So I want to introduce Dr. Annette Angus next, which is a senior scientist at the Clorox company.
Good morning from the West Coast. First, I'd like to thank the organizers of today's briefing, the ASM Federal Affairs team, and the ASM Subcommittee on Microbiological Issues Impacting Minorities. It is a particularly unique experience to be a microbiologist in the midst of a pandemic, but it's even more personally unique to be a Black microbiologist during this time. I appreciate the opportunity to speak and to share my experiences at this briefing today. My goals for today's discussion are twofold. First, to highlight the common barriers to progress for minorities in the sciences. And second, to highlight how these barriers exist in both academia and in industry. Over the past 2 decades, I've spent 15 years in academia and 7 in private industry. This time in both sectors as a Black scientist has allowed me to obtain a collective perspective on themes which are root causes for the lack of diversity in the sciences. Before I get to root causes, I'll start with what success looks like in both areas. In academia, the trifecta is scholarship, teaching, and service. This constitutes a body of work spanning across successfully peer-reviewed publications and top-ranked publications in journals, external recognition and awards, obtaining external grant funding to keep your research thriving, and this, of course, is funded through well-known mechanisms like NIH and NSF grants, and so on and so forth. Favorable teaching evaluations by students that then lead into student and trainee success. The ultimate goal, of course, is tenure. On the other side, in industry, the success measures look different. Those include company earnings, shareholder, and customer satisfaction. What success looks like in industry is, on the individual perspective, highly ranked annual performance reviews, internal visibility and exposure to leadership, getting assigned to favorable projects or customer accounts, success on a project and with a team, for example, a product launch, and then the ultimate goal being promotion along the corporate ladder. In both areas, an individual relies heavily on building relationships and credibility on the onset of one's career. In microbiology and in the sciences in general, these technical fields require extensive training and investment. This is through dedicated mentorship. Access to high quality training and professional mentors is often the first barrier to success for minorities. Generations of inequity have resulted in limited access and low representation of these resources. There are very few URM role models to serve as mentors and sponsors in both sectors. While the lack of diversity is in itself a barrier to progress, the institutional and organizational pushes to increase diversity by way of targeted recruiting of underrepresented minorities by increasing numbers is not enough. These efforts fall flat without acknowledging the appropriate equity and inclusion mechanisms that have to exist. The elements of diversity, equity, and inclusion are dynamic and interconnected. Diversity alone is not enough. A focus on diversity alone often results in a feedback loop: recruitment, attrition, recruitment. That drains resources and cuts talent pipelines and results in lost opportunities. At the core of these root causes is discrimination and bias. Both operate to limit access and progress, resulting in a deadlock to progress, no matter the solutions that diversity, equity, and inclusion can overcome and achieve. Identifying and preventing these as systemic issues which face underrepresented minorities in the sciences is a necessary first step. I'd like to take a moment to share my story, where I went, who I met, and what I did along the way, what I experienced and what worked for me. I'm a first-generation American, the first in my family to obtain a degree and to earn a doctorate. I had no professional role models. When I began my undergraduate studies, my first mentor took me under her wing. I was accepted into the NIH-sponsored MARC, Minority Access to Research Careers Program, and the MBRS program, Minority Biomedical Resource Support. She ran those programs and still does to this day. This was the pivotal experience that allowed me to thrive. I went on, and at each place where I went, there was a program. There was institutional support. And although there were only a few faces like mine, I kept thriving. When I left academia at the end of my postdoc, I participated in a wonderful program sponsored by the Procter & Gamble company called FIRST, focusing on industrial recruitment of scientific talent, a program that was aimed at increasing minority PhDs in industry. This gave me training and insight into what a career in private industry looked like. Since then, at both P&G and at Clorox, I've been engaged in the Black ERGs, or employee resource groups, which have been the lifeblood of my ability to navigate corporate America. When I ran into barriers along the way, I was able to tap into the network of resources of mentors that I had collected along my journey. As a result, I can now be that mentor, the voice and the face to young Black women who have the passion and the excitement but lack the confidence because they don't see themselves in a scientific career. I'm here today to pay it forward because there's a lot of work ahead. Thank you for your time and attention, and I'll be happy to take questions. Over to the moderators from here.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Angus. So we will now begin to take some of your questions. Just a reminder, you can post some of your questions in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. But as also, we have some questions pre-submitted to us. And so we'll begin with a question that was actually sent to us by one of our ASM ethics fellows. And it says, as a former grantee on an NIH minority supplement, how do we create a checks and balance system that not only assesses the research progress, but also ensures that the training obligation and career development aspects are fulfilled as well? So can anybody address that, please?
I think I can take that one because I'm, as a mentor and being in academia. Here at UTMB, what we have developed is a mentoring plan, where actually the mentor and the mentee actually every year they put their goals related to research, but also related to career development and mentoring. They both sign it, and then they are submitted to the graduate school, in this case, either for students or for postdocs. And every year, they actually review that document, and they see the advancements of that document. So every school should have a career plan for the mentors and the mentees. That way, they secure that they are obligated to provide those training to the students of the program.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. We have another question. And this one goes out to Dr. Taylor, but anyone can join in as well. It says, and this was in our chat, it said, those walls and barriers Dr. Taylor mentioned are the reasons you so eloquently explained exhausting women and minority scientists, Dr. Torres. So briefly, can Dr. Taylor, Dr. Torres provide some recommendations for breaking down these walls? And I believe that Dr. Angus did a great job of giving us some of that as well.
Yeah, I think the best thing or the easiest way to break down those barriers is what Dr. Angus mentioned, right? In terms of finding at least the people who are there to be able to support you and to help move you through the system. I think, and that's on the, like, as a trainee, on the trainee side. And so maybe Dr. Torres can speak more about what it would be like, what he thinks is good for the faculty portion.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I think it's very, very important for people to identify not just one mentor, multiple mentors. They allow you to navigate the way through academia, or in this case, industry with Dr. Angus. People that can actually truly support you, no matter what the color of your skin is, but they are trying to make you successful in the area of expertise that you are developing. I think that's very important. And one thing that it has to be clear is that gap that I mentioned, it has to be closed. There is no excuse why female faculty are taking longer to become tenured and promoted. There is no excuse that those faculty are making less money than the male counterparts. You're in the 21st century, that has to be closed.
And so I want to pose this question specifically to Dr. Angus, because I noticed that a lot of our funding agencies try to target the funding to increase the underrepresented minorities in STEM towards increasing them in going to careers associated with academia, but not necessarily towards industry and whatnot. So Dr. Angus, what do you think are some things that maybe we can do from a federal level to kind of enhance the number of underrepresented minorities who are pursuing STEM careers outside of academia?
That's an excellent question. And actually, I was originally slated for an academic career. It is by chance that I landed up in industry, and I was being trained to become a research professor. The mechanisms that stand do so to increase representation of minorities to go on to tenure track positions. The UC President's Award that I got during my postdoc at UCLA was intended just for that, to go on to be a tenure track faculty position at a UC campus. And this was over 10 years ago. As time goes on, and we realize that not everyone can go into academia, right? The numbers just, there's too many trainees and not enough tenure track faculty positions. So with that, we have to be smart about how we train scientists at the undergraduate, the graduate, and the postdoctoral level, right? So mimicking some of these programs, NIH and NSF programs, to actually provide the training to be successful outside of academia, I think is a definite necessary first step. Because if you already don't see people who look like you in terms of ethnicity in the sciences, and then you definitely don't see it in academia, there's going to be lost opportunities. And we're losing opportunities for minorities of color to go on to work in institutions like the NIH, other nonprofit sector, biotech. All of these places need scientists of color. So I think it's duly important to have specific training grants that then promote outside of academia success.
So I'm gonna come back to you. I have a question on our chat. It says, Dr. Angus, you mentioned building relationships and credibility, and I think this is really at the basis of most of the barriers in science. Could you discuss any ideas for improving these at an individual level or institutional training ideas to reduce this barrier? Is it always going to be up to individuals to build networks or people of people similar to us?
Great question. And right now it shouldn't be. It's exhausting to be a Black scientist. You have to do all the work that's just your day job, the science, which is already difficult. And then you have to do all the other things, all the social things, and blaze a new trail and reach out to people. It's very exhausting. At the end of the day, you really have 3 or 4 jobs, not just one. One thing I can say is, especially in this new virtual world, as we can get critical numbers across, institutions, across states in the US, or even internationally, right? A mentor does not necessarily need to be within reach. I have found that along my journey, the ability to continue to develop and cultivate my network proves to continue to allow me to thrive. So I would say that on the onset, while there's a lot of energy investment to start to build that, along the way to continue to, through ASM, through other organizations, continue to seek out mentors and then serve as a mentor. Because when you start serving as a mentor and you start saying yes to opportunities like this one, then people can see you and they know, oh, there's someone like me at this institution or at this company. And then that starts to kind of just take off on its own.
Thank you very much. And I want to pose this question to either Dr. Taylor or Dr. Torres. So do you have examples of successful programs that the federal government supports that we should examine and consider expanding or recreating at other federal agencies?
Yeah, so it's it's one of the ones that I mentioned while I was speaking. It's a fairly new program, but the Mosaic program it's a K99 R00 program. So basically it's a career development award, and it allows for a specific amount of mentored research as a postdoc, and then it gives you basically the equivalent of an R01 or like a big grant that people use to then start your faculty career. And it evaluates or takes into account some of the extra jobs that Dr. Angus was talking about that you might have as a minority postdoc or graduate student, right? And I guess essentially gives you additional credit in addition to evaluating you for your research. And so the program is the first application was last February, but the way that it's described, and I think the information that's been given so far, it seems like it's a really great program. And so I would love to see that expanded to not only within the NIH to other career awards, but I think something at the NSF like that would be really great. Or even, I know DoD does a lot of like research funding, so expanding to those other government agencies I think would be really good.
I will quickly mention 3 programs that are my favorite ones. I think PrEP and MARC programs that allows the undergraduate students to do research, those are working. You can actually see, because look at the numbers at Abercrombie, look at the numbers at SAGNAS. We are getting more and more underrepresented minorities in research. The one that I would like to see reproduced in other agencies will be the research supplements for underrepresented minorities. People that have R01s or R23s. I was a recipient of one of those when I was a grad student and a postdoc. And that's what made my career. And I have now students in my lab doing the same. So if NSF or USDA can have programs like that, we can actually increase the number of underrepresented minorities.
And I will admit that I received the NIE supplement as well, and that was instrumental in my career. And so just to follow up on that, Dr. Torres, if I can recall, in many of these sort of programs, one of the measurements of success is, again, putting students into graduate programs, putting them into programs that, again, perpetuate them going on to academia. And it's considered a negative in the assessment if they go on to do other things. Should that be reconsidered?
I think so. You know, the reality is there's not many positions in academia for faculty, regardless of their race and ethnicity. So students have to be prepared to be science writers, you know, government, industry, going to other areas of expertise. So I understand many, many years ago, there were so many different positions for faculty in academia, but there is none. So definitely has to be modified.
And I will add that, as a matter of fact, some students may be prevented from being a part of those programs if they, for example, it's mentioned that they want to go directly to medical school or so on and so forth. So I'm not picking on you, Dr. Torres, but we have another question that was targeted for you, but anybody can join in. It said, what advice would you give a minority female faculty who are struggling in their academic institutions? For example, these faculty have heavier teaching loads, no mentoring committees, which lead to not being able to obtain funding. Should they go elsewhere?
Well, obviously, the easy solution will be to go elsewhere. I think the solution if you really want to make a change in that institution, what you need to do is form groups of female faculty that can actually support you. And as a group, actually go for leadership and try to change that situation. I think that will benefit you, and that will benefit the female faculty working in that institution. You know, if you join forces and then on the way, you can actually get male faculty to join you to support and basically balance that situation. I don't think anybody in upper administration will not try to listen to you and try to change that. If that doesn't work, then come to UTMB. We would like to have you here.
That's a recruitment plug right there. And so this one goes to Dr. Angus. So do you believe that there are more opportunities for women and people of color scientists in industry versus academia? Or do you see the same barriers exist there?
Well, so there's two things. So first, maybe numerically there's more in terms of like there are more entry-level positions in industry as opposed to entry-level or assistant professor tenure track. However, the same barriers exist, right? It is not easier to go into industry, biotech, government work as a Black scientist. It is definitely not easier. And that's what I was hoping to illustrate with, although the fact that the measures for success to get to tenure, promotion, and whatnot are different, the barriers are exactly the same. So I don't want to make it seem like leaving academia is something that you're giving up and then you go on to industry because it's a smooth path. It definitely is not.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, that's going to have to be our last question, but I would like to thank the panel for all their words of wisdom. And with that, I turn it back over to Dwayne.
Thank you very much, Floyd. And wanted to say that in closing, thank you very much to our panelists. You guys did a wonderful job. It was great to hear from all of you and just wonderful experiences out there. One of the questions, I do want to point out something that I saw one question about mentoring, and all of you talked about mentoring and how to facilitate that. Societies such as ASM do a wonderful job of training mentors at the faculty level to reach out to and network with students. And so that training is vitally, vitally, vitally important. So I'm just going to put one little plug in there for ASM and the things that they do around mentoring. It's really great. So in closing, I want to say that we're going to be posting a recording of today's webinar online along with the resources mentioned by the panelists in the coming days, and we'll share that link with all of you once it's ready. And that pretty much concludes our program. And I want to thank all of you for coming out. I want to again thank our panelists. I want to thank ASM for holding this. I think it's timely, and I think it's overdue and so well needed. So thank you all.